Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fourth event in celebration of Mamas, Martyrs, and Jezebels, myths, legends, and other lies you've been told about Black women. I'm going to hold up the anthology so that people can see it. Mamas, Martyrs, and Jezebels, myths, legends, and other lies you've been told about Black women revisits notions of Black womanhood to include the ways in which Black women's perceived strength can function as a dangerous denial of Black women's humanity. This collection addresses the stigma of this extraordinary endurance in professional and personal spaces, the Black church, in interpersonal partnerships, and within the justice arena, while also giving voice and value to Black women's experiences as the backbone of the Black family and community. In this event, contributors to the section of the book dedicated to the theme art will discuss their work. Our moderator is Dr. Jan Boulware, who wrote the introduction to the section and who is one of the anthology's editors. Dr. Boulware is a tenured professor of English and dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at Bethune-Cookman University, located in Daytona Beach, Florida. Dr. Boulware has built her career in education on myriad levels, from primary school to the tertiary level. She holds a BS in early education, childhood education from Georgia Southern, an MED, Masters of Education in Reading from Mercer University, and a dual doctorate degree in English and Humanities from Clark Atlanta University. She's an accomplished teacher-researcher, writer, curriculum creator, and administrator. Her research interests include Africana women's literature, African American folklore, and dialects and cultural linguistics. Our panelists are Professor Margot DeShiel, and I'll be reading our panelists' bios from the anthology itself. So Professor Margot DeShiel is a retired community college instructor of African American Studies and Sociology. She lives in Berkeley, California, where it was outside the classroom with a small handful of students in the early 1960s at the University of California that she embraced African American history and culture and their connection to Africa. She keeps an eye open for aspects of African culture that continue to survive in African American life. Seedbed Stories is a chapter in a full-length manuscript about creating familial ties with the young Ghanaian Courage, both in Ghana and by telephone. Today, navigating her eighth decade, she spends time advocating for supportive housing and better services for those living with mental illness or mental illness. She continues to remain in touch with Courage. Our next panelist is Lashermaine Jefferson. Lashermaine, or L.A. Jefferson, is an author of contemporary women's fiction novels, Unfinished Business and Reconciliation to Hell. In December 2023, L.A. published a Christmas romance novella entitled A Christmas Staged for Love. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in several anthologies, including Daddy, reflections of father-daughter relationships, a widow's resilience, and more recently, I'm Speaking Now, which is part of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. LA shares her writing journey along with pieces of her personal life on her blog, Naturally LA, and is a co-host of the podcast Conversations Between Widows. LA is a mother of two adult children and grandmother of two adorable girls. More about her literary works can be found on her official author website, lajefferson.com. Our next panelist is Sarah Bracy White. Sarah Bracy White is a poet, essayist, memoirist, playwright, and teacher. Her published works include Primary Lessons, a memoir, which debuted as a dramatic musical in 2021. The Wanderlust, a South Carolina folktale, and Feelings Brought to Surface, a poetry collection. Her work is frequently anthologized. The New York Times, the Afro-American newspaper, the Scarsdale Inquirer, and the Journal News have published her essays. She is a frequent contributor to and performer with the New York literary performance group Read 650. Sarah and her husband live in Austin, New York, where the sky and the Hudson River are her muses. Our final panelist, but definitely not the least, is Alison Wittenberg. Alison Wittenberg is a Philadelphia native who has a global perspective. If she weren't an author, she'd be a private detective or a jazz singer. She loves reading about history and true crime. Her other novels include Sweet Thing, Hollywood and Maine, Life is Fine, Tutored, and Sane Asylum. Her short story collection is entitled Carnival of Reality. We'll head off our program today with an initial reading and introduction by Dr. Jan Boulware. Then each panelist will read sections of their works in the anthology. After this, we'll get to the discussion portion of the event. As always, audience members are encouraged to join the discussion using the chat function. Audience members are also urged to mute their mics so we can have seamless conversation and few interruptions. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jan Boulware.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to have you all here. In the tiny little conversations that we had just before we started this meeting, I feel like we've already gained an affinity and a sisterhood with each other. So again, I'm so happy to be here. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we came to this project. It's largely because of sisterhood and kindred mindset with the fellow editors. And I see that Dr. Wes White is here with us this evening, who is one of the fellow editors. The others are Dr. Rondrea Mathis and Dr. Kadista Youssef. I affectionately refer to them as the Fly Dogs. I come from a family of 5, and there are 4 girls, and I'm the youngest. And so I've always been drawn to extraordinarily gifted women because I think that my sisters are the bee's knees. I am the most at home, the most at ease, and indeed the most alive when I'm around my siblings because I see them as almost as iterations of me, but better. Oh, and speaking of that, I see one of them, the other Dr. Boulware Gillespie. There are 3 Dr. Boulwares. And my oldest sister, Wendy Benton, is here as well. Boulware Benton is here. But my sisters, and isn't she beautiful, together with my parents, were my first examples of what love is. And they remain the most enduring examples of what love is to me. So coming together with these extraordinary women, and I'm so excited to hear the excerpts and for us to have the discussions with the authors panelists because it's just extraordinary writing. Um, it's celebrating who we are. And this project was as easy as slipping into my own skin because Black women are love to me. And so the section on the heart is one that spoke to me in such a profound way because I've been loved by so many Black women and now have experienced the many ways of love and loving, the ebb and flow, the loss and the gain, the beautiful stagnancy of that one little word symbolized by our heart. And that word is love. And I'll read my intro now. Thank you all so much for being here. Love. It's a small word, especially when scaled next to its meaning. Its definition is both personal and universal. It's precarious and everlasting. And to love or be loved by a Black woman, well, that's an altogether different marvel full of unquantifiable weight. Historically speaking, romantic love was often either compulsory or heartbreakingly abbreviated for the Black woman, as its parameters were often set by the other. For her, to love and be loved freely, without inhibition and with the same monumental measure of the love she gives to others, is as rare and as beautiful as Tanzanite. All matters of the heart and the experience they bring with them are essential to a Black woman's love story. A Black woman can quite literally love anyone. Those with more potential than promise, those who come to her broken or only slightly cracked, those who are whole or consumed by the pressures of a world bound by isms, racism, sexism, heterosexism, cisism, classism, etc. Still, she has a Kandake strength to love fiercely, unencumbered by societal expectations and costs, but the same may elude her. The matters of her heart, at once laid bare to the world and cloistered by the world, are as multifaceted and varied as her skin tones. Here, these extraordinary women before you present essays on these matters, mere glimpses into the collective and unique phenomenon of loving and being loved by a Black woman. And with that, I believe we will begin with Dr. Margot Dashiell.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm not a doctor, but thank you.
Okay.
Um, sure, let me say that I became interested in really embracing Africa when I got to college. I think that that was mentioned. It was something I didn't, think about before I got to college, and this independent group of Black graduate students, law students, and a few of us undergraduates began to read because there was nothing in the curriculum at UC Berkeley that touched on the Black experience. There was no course. You could study Sanskrit in ancient India or Swedish literature, but there was nothing on the Black experience whatsoever. So the students took it up. And the first book was The Myth of the Negro Past by Herskowitz, an anthropologist, and he began to identify all of the elements of African culture in the United States, which I thought was ridiculous until I read and absorbed and looked around and got very excited about this heritage. So I wanted to go to Africa and immerse myself in it. And this was my second trip in 2007. I had gone in 1965 when I was 22, and I had another opportunity many, many years later. So this is Seedbed Stories. There are times I ask myself why, with so little forethought, I accepted courage as my son. The below the surface of it wouldn't occur to me until years later. As in so much human behavior, my desire for a higher level of familial like support was hidden from me. In Ghana's traditional culture, age is respected, and I experienced that care and respect from Courage, the first and only young person I met that summer. Today, I would ask myself, is this kindness real or is it a setup? For those Ghanaians not born to privilege, opportunities for youth are poor. Life for everyday Ghanaians is hard, and games, online and otherwise, to win financial support from foreigners abound. I did not know then that careful judgment should precede trust. When, by second nature, I offered Courage emotional support, it wasn't apparent to me that the support would be mutual. I was drawing a protective hand around me, reminiscent of the security my father had once provided. As I made wide strides around the muddy red puddles strewn along coastal roadsides, Courage braced my arm. He bent down to face the taxi drivers and negotiated what he thought was a good fare for me. He opened the door and secured me in the taxis. To give me a few staples of everyday conversation, he tried to teach me Twi words. At home in California, my independence was second nature. Being older and African American, invisibility sat in a corner of my everyday habitat. Others did not perceive my need for personal support, and I barely perceived it in myself. I gave my time outward. Each week of my calendar was polka dotted with community commitments. I was available to family members. I spoke with my 90-year-old mother every day and often carried over meals I knew she savored. Courage showed me the support I offered to others, but on the surface of my mind, it was the stories that bookended my 10-day trip to Ghana and that inspired me to say yes to a second son. That first morning in Ghana's densely populated capital, Accra, when I fought through the torpor left over from the yellow fever inoculation, I was determined still to meet up with Diane Green and a group of African American teens she led on a 2-week rite of passage tour. One young woman from Berkeley was a granddaughter of a friend, and I had promised to stand in for her grandmother on the day of the culminating experience. As the spacious bus navigated narrow rural roads, 4 teenagers and a few chaperone mothers relaxed in its comfortable seats. Between directing the bus driver to meeting with a village chief and a visit to an orphanage in his territory, the leader of this journey to imbue the young people with their African heritage shared her beginnings with me. Because I am touched by stories of families who open their homes to children who are of no blood relation, I keep a mental file of them. First on my list was the story of El Haj Bamba in Guinea, who decades earlier I saw bring in the orphan teenager Kala into his compound and become his Baba, his father. But Diane's account of a family uncomplicated, yes, to multiple children in need was unparalleled in that mental compartment. I surmised an orphanage was on our itinerary because were it not for the Greens in Richmond, California, Diane would likely have spent her days in one. She said that in the late 1950s, in Richmond's working class community, in the shadow of the Standard Oil refinery, an elderly neighbor woman came rapping intently as Mrs. Green's screen door. Miss Green, she gasped. That woman with the 4 children around the corner just died. You know her baby's just 8 months old. Her husband's in jail for a spell and there's nobody to take the children. What you say, Miss Green replied, drying her hands on her apron. Honey, you know my children are grown. I don't know, but I'll see what my husband says when he comes in from work. When he arrived, and Mrs. Green laid out the neighbor children's predicament, Mr. Green is said to have responded simply, "Baby, if you'll raise them, I'll support them." At the time of the tour, it had been decades since Mrs. Green had passed on to glory, but every afternoon of her days in Ghana, Diane, who had been that 9-month-old, 8-month-old baby, called in to check on her 98-year-old adoptive father. I was in 60s as I smiled at the poetic justice, but deep down in the dark unconscious that I want to know, would somebody check on me? I'll skip. I have one other example of an African extended family supporting, all of them supporting a young man graduating from the university. And then I come back to courage. But these stories wrap themselves around my 2007 foray in Ghana and plowed my mental soil so the idea for a second son could take root. And when I would wonder at times how to respond to the trails courage followed and the trials he faced, memory would lead me to do what the Ghanaian family might have done. Over the phone, through email, and during my return visits, I embraced Courage's aspiration, helped with his purchase of a plot of rural land, praised his work ethic, his follow-through in support of his nieces. There were times in his village when he cooked for me. I even caught him ironing one of my African garments. He affirmed the value of my voice and never failed to say, "I love you, Mom. Before I met you, I was a lost boy, Mom." I could not have anticipated that in caring for him, I would find care, and that the informal adoption of a young African man would lead me to cherish both rich and challenging experiences far more than I could have managed when I deplaned in Ghana's airport in 2007. And thank you, by the way, to the editors. I thank you so much for including it, for the vision of the book that I cherish. And thank you to those who come. I see some of my family here and friends, Vivica, Kenneth, Bukola. Thank you for listening to me, and hearing this. Some for the first time, some don't know that about this.
Well, we're all happy to hear it. And thank you again. I already have my question ready for you, Professor, about courage and that divine intervention that brought you two together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're now going to hear from Sarah Bracy White, my other kindred spirit, and she's going to talk to us about my other mother, Aunt Susie.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be a part of this event tonight and to be included in this anthology. The piece that I submitted was about the woman who was my other mother. My first memories are of Aunt Susie's basement. I'm almost 5 years old and standing at one end of a long wooden table, dressing and undressing paper dolls. She's at the other end, stacking freshly ironed sheets, pillowcases, and tablecloths into bundles and securing them with brown paper tape. All the grown-ups in the family call Aunt Susie sister, even Uncle Will, her husband. She says she's old enough to be my grandmother because she was born when my mama was born. She was 16 when my mama was born. I wish she was my mother. Aunt Susie's skin is smooth and dark brown. She says it got that way because she likes her coffee strong and black. She always puts plenty of milk in mine to keep me from getting black, she says. She laughs when I say, I want it black so I can be just like her when I grow up. I love Aunt Susie more than anyone else in the whole world. She acts like the sun has risen when I run into her room each morning. On Thursdays, the day she takes off from her laundry business, we put on our Sunday clothes and ride the green and yellow trolley downtown. After lunch at the Horn and Hard Art Automat, We walk around and look at all the pretty things in the store windows. One time, Aunt Susie spotted a white fur jacket with the matching pillbox hat and the muff on display in the window of a children's store. When she took me inside and asked to see the outfit, the white saleslady told her it was very expensive. Aunt Susie glared at the lady and said she could buy anything she damn well wanted and had the money for. The lady turned beet red while Aunt Susie counted out the money for all 3 pieces. When I got home, I showed Uncle Will my new stuff and told him what happened. He laughed and said, Sis's mouth is going to get her in trouble yet. Aunt Susie laughed. The reason I moved up north was so my mouth won't get me in trouble, and I don't intend to let anybody, colored or white, disrespect me. And Susie seems to know everything, but she says she only went to the 8th grade. After that, she worked alongside her mama washing clothes for white families. By the time she was 22, she moved north to Philadelphia. Said she picked the city of brotherly love because she needed some loving after all those years of bad treatment down south. At first, she worked in a laundry downtown. After she married Uncle Will, they bought their 4-bedroom row house in North Philadelphia, and she started her own laundry business in the basement. She says, I'll never have to do this kind of work because I'm going to college. Sometimes while she's ironing, Aunt Susie tells me the story about how I came to live with her. She says that after my daddy ran off and left us, Mama needed to go back to her job teaching 3rd grade. My 3 older sisters were school age, but I was only 6 months old and there was nobody to take care of me. Me and Will had always dreamed of having children, she said, but I was barren while your mama spit out babies like watermelon seeds. The summer I'm 5 and a half doing one of Mama's annual visits. I overhear her and Aunt Susie talking in loud voices. Sarah's getting out of hand, sister. You're not teaching her proper respect for grown people. She talks to them like she's their equal. Oh, don't be so old-fashioned, Aunt Susie said. She just ain't scared of grown folks like we were. I don't want to argue with you, sister. I appreciate everything you've done to help me, but Philadelphia's not for me or my children. I want to take Sarah home. The memory of the life I shared with Aunt Susie sustained me long after I returned to South Carolina. No matter how degrading white people in Sumter treated my mother, my sisters, or me, I knew that they were wrong in their judgment of us. Aunt Susie had made me certain of my value long before James Brown sang, I'm Black and I'm proud. One day I knew that I too would escape the South and live a life like Aunt Susie's. From the distance, Aunt Susie was my family's guardian angel. When one of us was sick, she wired money for the doctor and medicine. Sometimes the money orders she tucked in her letters paid the light bill or the rent. If my sisters or I needed something extra for school or after-school programs, all we had to do was write to Aunt Susie. When I graduated from college, Aunt Susie was there. See, you made it, just like I said you would, she said, grinning proudly. Years later, when I self-published a book of poetry, Aunt Susie sold 24 copies to all her neighbors and friends, then mailed me a check for $150. I'm so proud of you. Can't wait until your next book comes out. One day, you'll be famous.
Simply beautiful. I know we all cannot wait to ask her and hear some more about Aunt Susie, an extraordinary woman who raised an extraordinary woman.
Thank you.
And finally, we will hear from Allison Wittenberg, who's going to talk to us about an impossible choice.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be in the anthology, and I love what I've heard so far, and I can't wait for the the questions and the answers. This one is called Choice, and I'll try my best to act it out a little bit since there's a couple of different voices to it. My days were chaotic and upside down. It wasn't until 9 p.m. when the kids were asleep that I got around to drinking coffee and reading the morning newspaper. The Wednesday edition was thick with grocery advertisement. I went to the metro section when the phone rang. It was the woman from the agency. She asked after Brittany and then Alicia. She had gotten my youngest daughter's name wrong. I corrected her. Ashley's fine too. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant that. I heard the shuffling of paper. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I asked her. I'm fine. Good. Good. Next, there was a deep blue silence. I sipped my coffee and glanced at the end of section B, the obituary page. Their mother had another one, Miss Phillips, another girl. It was born 10 days ago. It has all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. From the living room, I eyed the door to the girls' room. My eyes then lowered. How did she get pregnant again? I thought she was in jail. She is. She's in jail and pregnant, I asked. She just gave birth. I hate calling you. I hate telling you this. How could you let this happen? I'm really the middleman, she explained. I can't take on another child, I told her. You don't have to decide this minute. Why don't I call you in a few days? Where is she now? In jail. No, the baby. The facility has temporary housing for, a chill went through me. That's a sin. The baby is in custody? Miss Phillips, this is the way things work. How could you let this happen? Please, I almost didn't call, but I thought you should know, Miss Phillips. I'm giving you too much at once. I'll call back in a few days. Her tube should be cut and then fried. My sister came in. My sister told me the next day. The child is already here. Then let Steven Spielberg adopt it. He likes our people. He's a millionaire. You're a secretary, barely making 30 a year. He's got an estate. You live in a lousy apartment. My sister was in finance and dapper like a cat with her large made-up eyes and new outfits every week. She railed at me about my cramped 700 square foot apartment. Helen was self-organized, so naked in her hedonism, so singular, so opinionated. But there are advantages to being a deadbeat. She sat as I unpacked the groceries and sat as I put away the groceries and sat as I began making supper. I was making steak sandwiches just like the sub shops do, with all the fixins, tomatoes and peppers and fried onions and grease. I placed the frozen meat portions in the pan. I work in a gray building, filing papers. There, when the phone rang, I answered it. We look alike, my adopted daughters and me, my adopted children and me. The rich mocha and cocoa hues of my skin match theirs. They look like childhood pictures of me and my sister with their wide brimmed noses, rust-colored plaits, and genetic trademarks. 4 could live as cheaply as 3, right? Right? What's another pair of school shoes, more money for milk, another college fund? I should take those children in. I should take that child in. I have to. Stop right there. Thanks.
And I know we all want to know more about that. You know we are going to have to get of course, we've all been taught in literature, make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait. And she really did make us wait, both then and at the end of this particular piece. And you're going to have to tell us a little bit more about that, Ms. Wittenberg.
Thank
I
you.
think now that we will go back to seedbed stories and Professor Dashiell. Before I ask my questions, I wonder first if you have a little bit more that you wanted to share with us, or if there are members in the audience that have any questions about that particular selection. Uh-oh, you're muted.
I'll see if there are any questions, and I can say a little more if not. Yeah, I in writing memoir or in journaling, I think we often do it because there is discovery, and we don't know things about ourselves until we are revealed in the writing and in probing why we do certain things. And I think for me, from the very time my father read me Black Sambo, that and when Black wasn't a negative to me at maybe 4 years old, I saw the mother as a welcoming presence, an embracing presence, Black Mumbo, who saved a little boy, by with the butter on the pancakes. Now the story's not coming to me, but she rescued her son. And I needed rescuing in the neighborhood where my family lived. We were one of very few Black families, and nigger was a ever-present word that would come from white children. And I identified with that rescue, that womb, that embrace in this African story, this so-called African folkloric story. It's really an Indian story, but the stereotypic rendering, we know was, the portrayal was of African people. And of course, I lost all of that, except in my subconscious until I got to college and other students talked about our history began in Africa. So it was something that I wanted for a long time. And I did not know, the depths of appreciation I would have for the support that a young African person showed me. It was very familial, took me back to my childhood, the protection, the look where one is very vulnerable in a foreign country. We often don't know that until we get there, the being lost in a foreign place, not knowing the customs or the jeopardy one might put oneself in going this way or that. So it began a fantastic journey for me, and I'm still in touch. 15 years later, with courage, he sent me a video this morning of a second plot of land he's bought to help support his daughter in the future. He has since gotten a wife. He has a 2-year-old daughter who is named after me, Margot Julia. And he has the energy to build on a 2-acre plot, an animal husbandry and crop producing place, so that he can support his daughter in the future. So it's a quite beautiful thing for me to see and appreciate. He was pretty much an abandoned child, I should say that. So I, at the time, I still have a son. And at the time I went to Africa, he was estranged from me. It was very painful. So I realized the subconscious elements, many that were going on there.
I'm thinking too about how there must have been something in what we, when we talk about blood memory, and particularly for Black women. And this is a question that I would pose for all of us to sort of ponder. Do we, and it's in the title of our book, do we struggle with this sort of superwoman complex and what it means to be a woman and a mother because of the examples that we were given? And I think about the question that you asked is your love for courage because you want someone to always be there to check on you? And it sounds like he's still checking in on his other mother. So what would you say about that?
I do think it's posed in the book. I believe in the beginning that and it was read by Mr. Animashun that we expect to be super women, and the idea of the superwoman is a very dangerous thing.
It is.
And I think that I was carrying so much responsibility and much of it self-imposed that I didn't realize what support would feel like. That kind of support that one can often get in Africa, where age is traditionally highly valued. And it was very embracing. It was very nourishing. And, so this duality of nourishment, you kind of expect a one-way street.
Right.
I think in our dispersal through the country and into the North and what have you, we're more accustomed to individualism.
Absolutely.
And I think much of it's still with us, the communal feeling that, very deep in the South where my grandparents came from, but not, that we still find it. We still find pockets of it, but the depth of the communal responsibility is still a little stronger in Africa, though it's very westernized and there's a lot of exploitation going on too.
But isn't it telling that, you said that you went when you were in your 60s when you first met Courage.
Yes.
That experience with him, with you all being on sort of different roles, you're the mother, this is the child, reminded you of your childhood and the way things used to be with the respect and the give and take of that love that a mother has with a child from when you were a child.
Right.
Hearing you
Being
speak
fully
was
supported,
yes,
always
fully
protected.
supported.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminded me so much of stories that I've heard of my own mother and the household that she grew up in with grandmother and aunts and all of these women who shaped her. And like it just was, and just support. It was a support unlike anything else. And I'm happy that Courage found you and that you found Courage. Do you think it was some sort of divine intervention, or just was it something that was meant to be, or part of this journey of this?
I don't know. It was highly unlikely, just highly unlikely. That we would meet. A family friend said, he may help you get around this. I'm going to give you a phone number. A family friend here. But I had this injection, that you get when you go into a tropical country. I was very, worn out, and I thought, I'm not going to follow up. I've just got to get some rest for a few days. I'm not going to, follow. And he kept, emailing and telling the friend in San Diego that he hadn't heard.
Oh,
And so I did call, and that was fortuitous, to say the least.
Mhm. There are no accidents.
that's right.
Yeah. So
You
thank
just
you
have to
for that
listen for the
question.
messages.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that
Meant to
question.
be.
You never know.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions right now? We can, of course, come back if one arises for seedbed stories. We move now to my other mother. We want to hear more about Aunt Susie and what you can share with us about this extraordinary character. And, reading your piece, Miss White, I remember it brought to mind a conversation that I had with a colleague a few days ago. She just had her first child. The baby is, I believe, like 8 or 9 months old. And I remember when she was expecting the baby, that I told her that I said, you get ready to love in a way that you've never loved before. And I said, your parents love you, but you really have no idea how much they love you until you have your own child. But then reading this excerpt challenges that thought, because you wish that Aunt Susie was your mother as a child, because of the way that she surrounded you with love and shaped you, just as much as your biological mother. So we want to know a little bit more about her and what more you can tell us about that shaping all these years later.
This piece is actually the beginning of my publishing work as a writer. And I can't remember what made me write this, except for the fact that I have been was very torn about my relationship with my mother and my aunt. I felt that I belonged with my aunt because I had been with her from the time I was 8 or 9 months old until I was 5. It was one thing to be taken into a family that you've not been a part of, but it's another to lose the family that you've been in and go into a lesser complete family. I went into a single parent family from a point up north. I did the reverse migration that Blacks were doing during that period. I was born in 46. So this is in 51. I'm going back south. So I move into a family where my mother's a school teacher, but my mother has 4 children and is pregnant with her last baby as I come home. So here I am, this child who doesn't understand segregation, who doesn't understand the limitations that Southern parents put on their children for survival. I wanted to be in South Carolina, the same person I was in Philadelphia, and that was impossible. My Aunt Susie had been born in 1902 and left the South, went into Philadelphia, expected her life to replicate up north in freedom what she had had in the South, because she'd come from a loving 2-parent family with siblings. And that does not happen. She never gets pregnant. What I didn't read to the group is she adopted a child who at age 4 died of appendicitis. So this is just prior to the time that my mother has me and she takes me in. So to lose me is like losing that child all over again. But you see, when you're a child, you don't think about the other person's pain. That's why you say when you have a child as a mother, you begin to see what the feeling of love is. I began to recognize the pain that she must have felt at having me taken from her. I can tell you that part of her survival was because Aunt Susie saw a problem and sought a solution to every problem. She took in foster children. I was absolutely incensed that I had been replaced in her life. So for a long time, I kept at arm's length from her. I would not be close to her. I was so angry at her, angry at my mother. I actually wrote a memoir to, as Professor DeShiel says, to discover something. And it's in writing that memoir that I discovered both the reality of my aunt and the reality of my mother and how they both wanted to be the mother I needed. My mother had a sense of responsibility about the children she created. She wanted to keep her family together. And I think that Aunt Susie understood that because she did not contest my mother's taking me back. She understood a mother's desire while she did not have it. What this whole relationship did for me is it has made me the aunt I am to all my siblings' children. I have no children of my own. My husband has 3 who think I'm their mother and act like I'm their mother and act like I'm their children's grandmother. So I'm very fortunate in that. But my first responsibility in the family true sense is that I am my siblings' children's aunt. And my oldest sister's first child was born when I was 15. And that summer, I came and stayed in Washington, D.C. with her while she went to graduate school at Howard. That child, until she died, was my baby that my sister had in this world. There was nothing she could ask me for that I would not give her. And what has happened is I've watched it as the children grow. They come back. Their children don't see me as anything other than Aunt Sarah. So my husband's confused about, well, which of these are your sister's children and your sister's children's children? I am Aunt Susie to all, Aunt Sarah to all of them.
Same.
Because I know how to be an aunt. I know how to be that valuable person I'm to support. When my sister was on her deathbed, she had withstood death so many times. And I remember sitting there and holding her hand and telling her that I knew she was holding on for her children and that she didn't need to worry. I would be there for them. And I have been there for them. And it's not always in the financial sense. There is this emotional connection that I have to them. And one aside out of all of this is my sister had a baby in college and gave it up for adoption, the same sister who died. I found that baby and brought him into the family. He is a 55-year-old man, but he has come into the house and I am his Aunt Sarah. So we learn what we experience, not what people tell us. And we have these feelings that we don't quite understand. I've had to explain to my nieces and nephews that I'm not Superwoman, that I'm trying to have a full life. But when they need me, I am always there. I will stop what I'm doing. I will be a part of it. I arranged family celebrations for so long that I knew I was the elder in the family when those children started treating me like I used to treat the elders in my family. So I am now the family's elders. Like, no, Aunt Sarah, you don't have to go get desserts. We'll bring you pie. Do you want ice cream and you want a fork or do you want a spoon? And I started laughing because I recognize it, that that's what we are shown as children, and it's what we absorb, and it's what we do. While we are dispersed, we haven't given up that feeling. When my niece's husband died, I waited until after the funeral and went to Texas and spent a week with her after the visitors stopped coming, because I knew that she needed that. I knew her mother would have provided that. So it's a rich legacy and it carries with it responsibility, but it's a joy. it brings me something, having not had children, that's absolutely wonderful.
I think that's extraordinary. I know that this piece is aptly titled My Other Mother. Um, you know, being an aunt and having my godmother, Aunt Irma, in my life, you remind me so much of her. And I'm thinking about my nephews and nieces and um, how it's a different type of love as a mother, but it is other mothering. And it's a it's a beautiful thing to experience. And I'm thankful for Aunt Susie. And I know that your family are more than thankful for you and what you give them. Um, one of my best friends is she's never been married and she doesn't have any children of her own. She's got all of these accomplishments and alphabets behind her name. But she said that the title that she holds most dear is that of auntie. And she's auntie to dozens of people, both biological and folks that she has adopted. But it's that same other mothering that she's able to offer that transcends something as biological as giving birth. And that's exactly what it is. It's other mothering. And it's an extraordinary title that I know that your nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews are so happy for you to hold.
They bring me their babies. People say, "Oh, I'm a grandmother." I go, "Well, I'm a I'm a great aunt."
That's right.
Yeah. And I'm as proud of that as of any of the accomplishments I've done in the world. And I can tell you that with my first niece, who was born when I was 15, so by the time I was in college, she was like 3 and I was 18. I was dating a boy who would come to see me at her mother's house, and she would ask the boy, could she go on dates with us? And he would always say yes. So people would see the three of us all the time and they go, is that your baby? And I'm like, well, not exactly. But she was my baby. And we often laughed about that because that connection that you have with a child, it's never lost.
Mhm.
You can have long periods of time go by. They come back and they're that. And I had to laugh because my husband was jealous of how I waited on her when she came to visit us. He said, you don't wait on me like that. And I go, well, you're not my
You're
baby.
not my baby.
I said, you just got to make peace with that. And it was years later before he laughed and said, yeah, I realized that was a useless battle to fight because there was no way I was getting in between you and those kids.
Absolutely. Those lines, they blur. Your story about her wanting to come on dates with you reminds me of my oldest sister, the two older sisters who are on this call this evening. My younger brother used to sabotage their dates and tell them and call them mommy. So here they are, these young women in college, and he would, mommy, mom. And they like, wait a minute, I didn't know you had children. Um, and now that we're all adults and we're siblings, but they're the grandmothers to his children.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Because of that, it's just the lines are blurred. The other mothering and the love is without bounds.
I don't know what I would be if I had never had nieces and nephews, because for me, my very first niece was the person who taught me how to love.
Mm.
Realized that I was taken from Aunt Susie to my mother, who had 5 children that she was rearing alone and teaching school, and she hardly had the energy to deal with a high requirement kid like me. So I spent a large part of my life sequestered in books and playing alone because I'm 5 years younger than the next oldest. So the question is, have I sequestered my emotions And when I was 15 and my sister put that baby in my lap, and that baby reached for me, and I was responsible for her all day until my sister came home from work. And I began to understand what unconditional love was. So I had gone back to being 5 years old, because to that child, she just absolutely thought I was the sun and the moon and the stars, which is a reverse of what I had been feeling with my aunt. But I was allowed to feel that. I didn't have to worry about, well, you can't be hugged up over boys and you can't do this with boys. And so where are you going to put this, learn this kind of honest love? I learned it from a baby who was 9 months old. And it has stayed that kind of open emotion. I never had to go to therapists to find out how to find that in me. I found it by practicing with a child, my niece.
Absolutely. That is just beautiful. Do we have any other questions of Ms. White? And again, we can come back at the end. Finally, Ms. Wittenberg. Now you have to finish and finish off the end of the story, because you just teased us a little bit. And I want you to tell us about who you thought Miss Phillips chose at the end of the story, and how she was able to come to that choice, and if she stuck with it.
That's a really good question. I, you know, I call the story choice for a reason, because there's moving choices in it. And I think with parenting, and I am a parent, I remember, my mom and dad would say something and they sounded so definite about what they were saying. But I know as a parent, when I make a decision, sometimes it isn't definite. I might sound definite about it, but I'm still weighing it in my mind and saying, oh gosh, I wish I could go both ways on this. But you have to sort of say, it's, it's not going to be perfect. I take the story as just exploring this idea, of, what do you do if someone says suddenly, and I do mean suddenly, not 9 months, but suddenly your family's going to be this much bigger, and already you're strained, and already there's it's tough, and already you're making this huge sacrifice. The sister, Miss Phillips' sister Helen, I mean, she doesn't, she thinks she's pushing her one way, but actually she's pushing her more the other way.
Right.
And I see it as, discussion, putting it out there. It's a time limit, and it's something she decides to hang up the next time she's called to do this. But you're right, it's not definite. It just ends. And it could definitely, she could definitely call back within 5 minutes and say, okay.
In my
And
heart, I think she did. I
yeah,
do.
well, it's based on a friend of mine, and she did end up adopting 3 children in that manner.
Wow.
But yeah, and I think that's what, I mean, you have to. These are, they're together. They're a unit, and the way my friend had told me the story, she says, I felt like someone was asking me to have an abortion,
Right. Yeah. And
and
there's a woman
it's
guilts her and says, I'll give you a few days to think about it, but then she calls right back. I really need to know.
yeah, yeah, and everybody. I mean, of course, there's a logical, whatever logic means when you're talking about a situation like. And there's an idea, but talking about money, I mean, money is not what a child needs. A child, it's exactly what we've been talking about tonight. Heart. A child needs support.
Right.
A child needs you. Doesn't matter if you're, I mean, a lot of families that have everything materially, and
Nothing.
they're, yeah. So, even though it's a small, cramped place and, it doesn't have all the modern things or whatever people are used to. I mean, she's a very good mom to these girls. And I talking about it, since I've done the story, people will say, well, gosh, there's going to be 5, 6 more kids that she's going to have to adopt. This could keep going forever. But she's very happy with, and now they're adults. I mean, she's very happy and she doesn't regret her choices. I mean, how could you? You don't regret things like that. You do regret when you make the other decision. So, I wanted to honor it, and I think even the way it ends, and it's so short. It's really, really short.
Mhm.
Um, Going on and on with it, I don't see how she could have come up with that decision.
And I think it
But
was so effective to do it that way. I love the brevity. It's an impossible choice. Whatever she decides is impossible. So that's why I'm going to choose to believe she led with heart.
well, like you were talking about the Superwoman thing. I mean, a lot of us have been asked to do superhuman
Mhm.
things, and nobody makes a comic book about it, about
That's
some of
right.
the choices that we make day to day that actually save people's lives. So, it
The
just,
thing that the thing that you did that really struck me, you introduced her sister with the same kind of duality of feeling. She's thinking that her sister's doing too much with all these children, and yet she comes in and enjoys the relationship. There is a possibility, because love is impractical. It is never practical.
That's right.
So her sister could at some point turn table and become a partner in taking care of these children. That sometimes you just have to take that first step and it becomes inevitable. So she has another one down the line. We'll see when that one comes along. And, you know, we've learned to make do with so little that we figure if we've got a little, we can make a lot and we can do a lot more. That's what the Superwoman thing does. It makes us keep going when another person might say, I ought to give up on this. This is too hard and this is too expensive. But we keep going and somehow we make a way out of some way. And that's how I felt when I read this story. I was like, oh yeah, she's going to take that baby.
She will. Yeah, she did. She absolutely did in my mind. But I'm thinking too about mothering, loving the heart. One of the most difficult experiences in my life, that was also one of the most freeing experiences in my life, was coming to the realization that my mother was indeed human
mm,
and therefore capable of being wrong. And to me, that was a very painful realization, but at the same time, it was also very freeing because it allowed me to be and accept myself as human and more than enough as a woman, as a mother, and this impractical thing called love, as you so aptly dubbed it, Miss White. Um, let's talk a little bit more about that with heart and how it centers on how our hearts center on this thing called mothering, which is what these stories in particular uh, speak to. And I'm talking to audience, panelists, let's talk a little bit more about that, explore this big word, mother, that is synonymous with heart. You know, I did my dissertation on Big Mama and the Whistling Woman, this sort of dichotomy of the Jezebel, the Whistling Woman. And I took that from a little edict, a whistling woman and a cackling hen ain't never come to no good end. So I thought that a whistling woman, she was a bad woman. So, you know, they always fascinated me. You know, she was a Jezebel. What was it that made her so different from this larger than life Big Mama who was um, her complete and total opposite of this woman of ill repute? You know, Big Mama was in many ways boring, even though she was the mother to the entire community and could do no wrong. You know, even in, I mean, to when I was a young woman, one of the worst insults you could say was your mama. And I believe it is still pretty much the same. Um, but let's talk a little bit more about that and the gravity of that word, mother, and what it has meant in your lives and with respect to the readings that we've had here this evening.
I'd like to talk to it because I've struggled with my emotional attachment to my mother, or emotional disattachment. It took writing a full memoir for me to begin to feel what other people have felt about their mothers, because I had to look at her life and her behavior in a different way. I was grown. My mother did 30 years before I learned that my mother's mother died when she was 15.
Mm.
So therefore, her ability to mother was impacted by the fact that she wasn't mothered. She had a mother substitute, my aunt, who was taken care of, but there's nothing like your mother. And I talk about in a play that your mother is your mother. There is no substitute for that. You're always looking for her. And I wrote a book where I explored all of the things that formed my mother's history, which actually made me come to understand why she was reserved, never revealing of the pain that she was feeling, because she thought that she had to be that superwoman. She had to take care of these children that had been abandoned by their father that she brought into the world. But what she was doing was she was building this cascade of pain in the daughters who were watching her and were not learning how to be Big Mama in any kind of way, because that's the core of motherhood. Self-sacrifice is one of the necessities of being a mother. It's not superwoman, it is the self-sacrifice of small things. My niece said to me, I never knew I could live without so much sleep as I used to get. But she said, I wouldn't trade this for anything. So you want to be a mother. You want to have a mother. And sometimes the two never occur in the same space. So you try to find a way to solve it. And usually we find it by building an emotional wall around ourselves. And we must tear down that wall in order to survive. Otherwise, we're always locked in this cave of regret and missing and not learning how to find love in the nieces and nephews and other people's children. I tell people I work so much with other people's children because I'm not locked in caring for mine 24/7. I'm able to come in and be a person, and children will listen to me in a way that they don't listen to their parents. I was a Fresh Air Fun host, and the people whose kids I had wanted to know how I got them to eat vegetables when they couldn't get them to eat vegetables. And it's because I wasn't trying to force them to eat vegetables because they were going to be unhealthy. I ate vegetables because I liked vegetables. So they watched me eating something that I told them most children didn't like, so I didn't offer them any. And they go, well, we haven't tried it. So can we try it? And I'm thinking, oh, is this what you have to do? I really didn't care whether they ate them. So it's this complicated dance that mothers and daughters do. And I think that your recognition that your mother was not perfect is something that allows men and women to grow, to recognize that they don't, like you say, have to be perfect, because this woman they loved, thinking she was perfect, was not perfect, but they loved her anyway. It's why I say loving is impractical. We love despite failure.
Absolutely.
I'd like to comment, and from this perspective, I just wonder culturally where it comes from. You know, Miss White is talking about Aunt Susie, and Allison is talking about the adoption already of 3 children, or fostering the character. And I don't know that we would see this phenomena in the same extent in the majority community. So I think about that. Is there something in our tradition coming out of our cultural experience, out of our historical experience, whether it just formed here under the abysmal circumstances we found ourselves in bondage, or does it derive from Africa? Where is it that we have the sense that we must parent,
Well,
that many of us carry? And I just want to say that I follow Barry Jenkins, the filmmaker who did Moonlight and the series, I think on HBO, The Underground Railroad. I heard him say in an interview that we were the only people, or the first people, to engage in that collective experience of child rearing, to feel the mandate to child rear. And he's talking about both men and women for children that were not ours in that experience that lasted for so long in bondage. Anyway, you were going to say something, Miss.
Oh, I don't. You were no. You said it all beautifully, but that when we're talking about the blurring, I mean, everything's blurry when it comes to Black people. I mean, we call ourselves brother, sister. We don't know. If you go far back, you don't really know who you're related to. That's why, mama, papa. I mean, we're always using family terms for people in and out of our, like, immediate family. It's just sort of and cousins, and it's cousins are like brothers and sisters, and everything is blurry when it comes to Black people, specific to, well, you spent a lot of time overseas, but specific to this country, the whole North South thing. I mean, there's so much that's so much history that's put in this book. It's touches on so many things.
That's why it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah, but it's necessity. I mean, I wonder. I mean, there's a lot of brokenness. I mean, just the nature of being here. There's brokenness and there's healing, but then there's a lot, there's a lot of healing that's needed. So, it's it's a added dimension, being Black in America. There is an added dimension to that.
I think that part of it is blood memory, but I think that part of it too may have to do with what you're talking about with this brokenness and us being able to recognize cracks, because we're also imperfect and carry our own cracks from our own experiences. And so we desperately want or don't want anyone else to experience that, particularly as as Black women. And so that's why Auntie steps in. That's why the older sister is literally the other mother, and my brother calls they call my oldest sister Yaya, which is another word for grandmother. Those lines are just blurred in that way. And I was thinking too about a conversation that Miss White, you and I had before we started this session this evening, about how when you come from a family of several siblings, they get different versions of your parents. And therefore your experience with them is colored a little bit differently because of birth order. And I'm curious to know what my sisters would say about that, but I'm not going to put them on the spot if they don't want to speak.
Well, I have to tell you that it took my sisters a long time to acknowledge that what I was doing and what I was saying made sense, because for them, they just thought I talked a lot. And as I began to write things down, I would show it to them, and they were amazed that I remembered things precisely as they happened from when I was so young, because I was paying attention to all these grown people. Mind you, I'm 5 and 10 years younger than my sisters, so I'm watching them live their lives. And I was bored coming from Philadelphia, South Carolina. So I'm watching these people and figuring out what's going on. And for them, I was just a child in the way. So yes, my mother had the oldest child for 2 years with nobody else. Then she had the second one. And then 3 years later, she had a third. So for 5 years, she just had 3 children, and they were in a stable family situation. So her relationship with them and their relationship with our father was quite different from what happened after he left, and he would come home and she'd have another baby and he'd leave. And suddenly this baby knows nothing about the father. But because I'm a writer, I've had fun writing plays about what went on. So I can use some truth and some fiction, but I can, we want solutions. We want stories that solve our unfinished stories in our heads. And I think that everybody here is either a writer or a reader. So, here we are talking about this piece about the adopted children. Everybody can look at their life and see some of these stories and go, oh yeah, well, that's why that was happening in that person. We can't see them in our own lives so easily. But when you begin to write, Professor Dashiell, you're right. You discover stuff. Your best memoirs are only memoirs that are written where the writer discovers things about themselves along with the reader. So that's what drives me as a writer. I'm looking for answers to the things that still cause me distress in my life. And then I see it in other people and I want to write it. And then they go, oh, this happened to me. I thought it was just me. No, it's sometimes cultural, sometimes familial, sometimes systemic pain that one person passes on to the other. And once, if you don't recognize a problem, you can't solve it. So when you can talk to somebody else who nods their head while you're saying something, it's like, okay, we got a common ground here. Just like Dr. Boulware, we were talking beforehand and we made all these connections.
Right.
Like, yeah, well, there are 4 girls in my family. I'm the 4th. My baby brother is the baby, my brother is the baby. Yeah, that's the same in my family. So we keep repeating the same things without understanding them. And I think we begin to look and begin to go. I think that some things are on our DNA that we don't know about. They've done studies on mice where they would shock them and turn a blue light on. 3 generations of mice down, they just put the blue light on and the mice start jumping. So what makes us think that we aren't passing trauma that's happened
That's right.
50 years ago
That's
before
blood
my parents
memory.
were born? Yes,
Absolutely.
it's blood memory.
Mhm.
So yes, I agree that it is. And sometimes you just got to say, okay, it's what it is, but I'm not going to let it kill me.
I know that's right. Well, with writing and us reading together, you learn more about yourself. We learn more about each other and this journey we call life. I do see that Dr. Bulwer Gillespie's hand is raised, my big sister.
Yeah.
Let me just say what a beautiful evening this has been, and I so wish so many other women could have been here to share in the experience, because listening to each of you share and the stories that are told, it is truly wrapped in the experience. It's necessary. And I was going to just echo or speak to a little of what Jan shared, because there's 10 plus years between the two of us. And with my older sister, we've often talked about how the younger girls don't know the mom of age 30. They don't know her of her mid 20s, even. And so the experiences that we take of who our mother is, flawed, imperfect, perfect, beautiful, um, all the things, it comes from where we were at that time for the experience. I have 3 sons, no daughters, but I often share to them when I have to apologize, or when there's something that I'm like, you could have handled that a little bit differently. I remind them I've never been the mother of a 31-year-old you. I've been the mother of a 19-year-old you, a 10-year-old you, but I don't necessarily know that I got it right for the 31-year-old you. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to understand it's the experience of where we are at that moment that is going to be so impactful in who they become. In particular, I'm very careful as it relates to them becoming men. My oldest son shared with me, and he said, "Mom, don't take this the wrong way." He says, but it reaches a point where you cannot be effective in our life as a man. And I totally appreciate that and understand that truth. But it has been the experience of knowing where you are at that moment. He remembers me at, of course, a younger age of me growing up than his youngest sibling, who's only 18 years old. So I just appreciate the storytelling. I appreciate the experiences. I appreciate all of this, because in the sharing and in the hearing of it, it changes us.
That's right.
See, I will no longer be the same after this evening because of the stories shared and the conversation that's been had. And that's why it's so important that things of this type, forums of this magnitude, go forth. So I'm so proud of each of you, certainly so very proud of my darling baby sister. But I each and every one of you all for this amazing evening tonight.
Thank you, love.
Oh, isn't that sweet?
Very much appreciate those words.
Yeah.
I think Vivica has a hand up.
Yes.
I see.
Hello, everyone. I absolutely have to thank each and every one of you for this wonderful evening. I feel like this is a homecoming for my soul. and my cup is now full, and I can move on into this world where when I was coming up, folks used to say the world is just too much with us. Well, that cup is so full, and I am so grateful. And you know, at times when it's hard to love myself, I get there. Tonight I have gotten there through the love of my community. I really feel that I'm standing taller and stronger because of this evening. I thank each and every one of you so very, very much. I've had a smile on my face from the beginning, and it's it's still here. Um, it's just wonderful, and it reminds me of something that a writer once said to me when we talk about ourselves and our community. She said, "Don't you know that only the finest of diamonds are put into the hottest fires and then dipped into the coldest water before they are polished off to shine?" And I feel that every single the authors tonight, I'm so grateful for everyone's comments. I'm so grateful for, and in my mind and in my heart, we are all shining.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm just so incredibly grateful.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're all smiling and a little bit brighter when we realize together is the only way. And it's just something to be said about being together in a safe space and sharing these stories that is healing. I was sharing before this forum about how since November I have been down and had been battling with depression again, as I think many of us were and may still be, because the world just seems like a really, really mean place. And I hadn't felt this low, and I don't mind sharing, in several years, when I lost the two most important men in my life. I got divorced, and 6 months later, my father, who was the best human being I've ever known, died. And the depth of the sorrow and depression that I felt at that time, that feeling of hopelessness and never thinking that the world would be changed forever. And it was, but I would come to know in a beautiful way, at least with respect to losing that 150 pounds, called my ex-husband. But it was back then what saved me were my sisters. My sisters who called me and told me, you got to put that oxygen mask on yourself. You have to get out of bed and save yourself. You've got children to live for. You have yourself to live for. My sisters, my sorority sisters, who reminded me what Seth said in Beloved, you are your own best friend, or you are your own best thing. Even thinking about my father, who had told me, you know, I never understood what he meant, but he said, first I'll be first, then I'll be first. In other words, you have to take care of and love yourself first. And though those were the, you know, horrible time in my life at that time, that brokenness at that time made me the woman that I am today. And we're still evolving and changing. So here again, when I was going through this sadness and this feelings of hopelessness, what has saved me and what sustained me and what continues to sustain me and bring me out of that dark place is that I know that we're in this together. And again, it was my sisters and the love of women in particular who helped to remind me about that we are collectively our own best thing. And I thank you all so much for being with us this evening. Did we have any other comments before we sign off?
Well, I just want to thank you for something much more joyful and nourishing than I, had expected coming in. I thought it would be a very nice experience, but it's deeper than that. I appreciate your graciousness. There's just a real warmth to what you brought out of us and shared of your own experience, all those who spoke. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. I
And
see my sister, Wendy Bower Benton. She has her hand raised.
Okay, you know what? First of all, I'm just so, as my sister right under me, Jade, said, I am so proud. And it's so funny how Jade and I both said of our baby sister. She will forever be our baby sister. I was just telling a friend of mine yesterday, no matter how much of an accomplished, amazing, magnificent woman she is, and even the sister right up under me, Jade, whenever I talk about them, I still call them my baby sisters because I'm the oldest. So I'm Yaya. And I just wanted to say that I'm very grateful to have been invited to be in the presence and company of such amazing women. But it is quite important and quite fulfilling for me, Jan. I'm where you were after on November 6th. I literally, I'm coming out of the darkness. Let me just say that,
Right.
and it's hard to come all the way out of it when you still can see what the potential for harm to those that we love so much can be. And when I say the ones I love so much, I mean my siblings, I mean my children, I mean my nieces, my nephews, my grands, the friends of my nieces, my nephews, my grands, my sisters. And it's very, very difficult. But as you said, to know that we always have each other, that we always have a bond of sisterhood is quite encouraging, to say the least. And I think it is important to recognize, as my sister Jade stated, that we are all in completely different phases in our lives, period. In relationship to each other, in relationship to even how we feel about ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our spirits. But without each other, I think that we perish. I think
That's
that
right.
we really and truly have to have each other. And I just want to tell you, I'm proud of you, little baby girl, and I love you. I'm grateful to all of you women for how you honor my sister. And I am, as a big sister, I've always taken on a motherly kind of role, and of course, auntie and grandma and all that. But whenever I speak about my siblings, all of them, I speak of them with so much pride. So even for the sister that's right next to me, because we call ourselves the original crew, and then we call the three younger three younger siblings the younger crew. But all of them, I'm immensely proud of them, as though they are all my own. I am actually 13 years, I think, older than Jan. I am 18 years older than my youngest brother. His children, that's the one that would call me mommy when I was in college. And the guys I were dating were like, I didn't know you had a baby. And I'm like, I didn't either. And he looks just like me. So and that didn't help either. But so his children are like my grandchildren. But, and then I have another sister that I'm 11 years older than, and then it's about 2 years between me and Dr. Jade Bower Gillespie. But I'm so proud of all of them. And I'm so grateful at the end of the day to my parents. But I'm also grateful, and I'm learning to have even more gratitude to all the mothers in my life.
That's
And
right.
all the honorary aunties in my life. And even ancestrally, I think about the grandmother that I never knew that was my father's mother. How much of an amazing woman she must have been. I know she was, and her mother. And these were women that society obviously and clearly had written off, had just kicked to the, what are you? You know, you're just a South Carolina N-word. So I'm just amazed and grateful to know that the ancestors that I don't even know and never will, and they never will know me, poured into who I am today, poured into who you are today. And I think it is our responsibility to keep it going, to make sure that we are here for each other and that we are here for our own and for each other. And so that they can look back and say, you know, my auntie this, or my yaya that, or my mom this, or my sister that, because we are connected in more ways than we could ever understand. But I just want to say thank you for inviting me, Jan. And I'm so proud of you. And thank you, ladies. The readings that you shared were just magnificent. They were absolutely magnificent. And I'm so, so grateful. Truly, truly grateful.
Thank you, Mommy.
Thank you,
Sissy.
Wendy.
And Auntie Winnie, Mommy. Yeah.
Jan, I would just like to say to you and your sister that I appreciate you bringing up the feelings that many of us are experiencing as a result of the election. And I think it's important for us to pay attention to the atmosphere that can really pull us down. I know it has me such that I don't watch I really restrict how much I can watch because
Absolutely.
It hurts. And I think it means to, pull in those sisters and those brothers and whatever aunties or uncles and friends that we have to help cushion what is and what we could be facing. That's part of the problem. We don't know.
Don't know
how much is
No.
ahead. And I appreciate how far we've come, the capabilities that we see here. I don't think as a child I would have known, any PhD women, or medical doctors or lawyers or what have you. And we see that here, we see it in front of our TV sets all the time, what the opportunities have meant, and who has pushed so many of us forward. And we just hope that that can continue, and that we can continue to have the force that we've carried, despite what it looks like in the short term, we hope.
But I think that it's nights like this that remind us of who we are, and that we are so much stronger together. It is that realization that here again has brought me, and I believe is going to bring most of us a bit more peace, knowing that we're together, and together is the only way.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Together is the only way. I thank you all so much for being with us together this evening. We do have one last event on April 1st. It's going to be a roundtable consisting of myself and the other 3 editors. We'd love to have you there. Please come and join us. You register in the same way that you did for this session on the Black Lawrence Press website. And
Can you say the date again?
It is April 1st.
Okay. Thank you.
And it'll be the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern. With that, beloved, I thank you for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you on April 1st. And even if I don't see you on April 1st again, feel free to keep in touch with me. We are sisters now.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good evening. Good evening.
And thank you, Blank Lawrence Press, for doing this anthology. This is a wonderful collection.
Absolutely do
Mhm.
value it so much. Good evening.
Yeah.
Take care all.